Physiologist Prize Oral Presentation at the ECSS, New Investigator Award for American College of Sports Medicine, International Scholar Award for American College of Sports Medicine, Honourable Mention in the European Athletic Innovation Award, and the Radboud University Internationalisation Prize. His relationship with us in the school began more formally in 2007 when he took up a postdoc position under the watchful eyes of Professor Danny Green. I'm sure Danny may get a mention or two this evening. Following this, he received an EDEFI stipend from the Netherlands Heart Foundation to perform research at the Department of Physiology. Dick joined us more permanently in 2014 and quickly became an integral member of the school, the Research Institute, and our world-renowned cardiovascular health sciences research group, which now he is our strategic lead. Dick has over 66 peer-reviewed publications, a current H-index of 28. In addition, he has generated a notable over £1 million worth of research grant income into the school. Dick is a natural collaborator and is a great example of how institutions can work together to enhance our internationalisation through partnership. Our relationship with Radboud is extremely strong and is a testament to how Dick managed this particular relationship and also his work in the best interests of both institutions. His natural ability to collaborate makes this relationship work. Indeed, much of the research that Dick is involved with and we'll go through tonight has been through partnership and collaboration. And some of these notable partnerships include Aspire in Qatar, Copenhagen University, the Free University in Amsterdam, Melbourne University, University of Western Australia, Maastricht University, Missouri University, Syracuse University, and St. Mariana University. A really impressive array of collaborating partners. Dick has 4 PhD completions to his name as Director of Studies, 5 current PhD students, and a pipeline of 12 on his supervisory list. He's a collegiate member of staff, a fantastic leader, and well respected amongst all. He's also a decent footballer. A total football fan and a proud Dutchman. So I'm hoping he's not going to be too despondent with the lack of qualification for the World Cup. So I did ask around for a few funny stories to furnish my introduction, but to be honest, it was mainly commendations and positive testimonials in terms of the incomparability of his level of work and his high work ethic. Some quotes here from some of his colleagues. His dedication, drive, and knowledge and productivity is outstanding, and his ability and willingness to collaborate and empower others is first class. Dick has unlimited energy, a strategic thinker with clear long-term plans. He's a leader that guides and mentors the whole team. Like most Dutch people, he is clear and direct, and a real pleasure to work with. Dick is a research machine. I call him the Thijssenator. However, with all the communications that I did have, there was one reoccurring stand out, stand up, stand on moment that I was made aware of. And this was Dick apparently being seen standing on a table in the ship of Mindset with one of his PhD students, blasting out the Dutch national anthem after Holland had won a World Cup. I believe that incident of Holland winning a World Cup game was some time ago. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, hopefully Dick will not require a table to tell us his story tonight. I introduce and welcome Professor Dick Thijssen.
I'll not use a table and I'm not going to sing any songs. Before I will give a bit of a history of what I've done, where I come from, I first have to give a bit of explanation on the title of my talk. You'll Never Walk Alone is a bit controversial here in Liverpool. For some that don't know that, there are 2 big football clubs here in Liverpool, Everton and Liverpool, and the supporters of Liverpool adopted You Never Walk Alone as their song. Originally actually from Kerry and the Pacemakers, but they adopted this song and For those who haven't heard it, seen it, I just want to show you this movie. It's during the final Champions League 2005, 3-0 behind against AC Milan. But eventually they won. For those Everton supporters, I will stop it now. But I did not choose this title because of this, or because I'm a Liverpool fan per se, and to sort of support that story a bit. In the Netherlands, we sort of have the same controversy about that. We've got two teams. We've got Ajax and Feyenoord, and I'm an Ajax fan, and this is to show you that. More than 20 years ago, I'm that guy. So I didn't quite expect this response. But this is with a former Ajax player just after they won the Champions League, when they actually could beat some teams in Europe. And the other team that in the Netherlands that adopted a uniform colour is Feyenoord. And so to show you this, this is last summer when Feyenoord, after 18 years, won the title in the Netherlands. Some of you recognise this guy, this mate. I'm going to stop it now because it feels the same as for you guys who support Everton. So why did I choose this title? Well, the first reason has walk in the title, and a lot of my work relates to physical activity, walking. But the main reason why I chose this is that, for me, the title, You Never Walk Alone, stands for collaboration and working together. And that's really what I think what this science is about. It's really a group effort. And that's why I put up all these guys who have collaborated with me in the past and still are working together with me. And instead of doing that at the end of the talk, I do it now. This is all the stuff I'm going to present. It is really a group effort. There is a third reason why I chose this title. And that has to do with the history behind certain things and the history behind certain observations in science. And when I prepared my talk, I actually found out that the song You Never Walk Alone, although most of you might know it because of Gary and the Pacemakers, it actually comes from a musical from 1945, Carousel. And I'm going to show you a part of it and hear the song, and it's slightly different. Even some of the words are different.
When you walk through a storm, keep your chin up high.
So it's kind of different. I was sort of surprised that fans on the football club adopted a song from a musical as their song to support the team. Then to the second part of my title, from Nijmegen and back. This is where Nijmegen is in the Netherlands. And I regularly take the trip to Liverpool and back. But for me, it actually started in Zandvoort, where I grew up. And Zandvoort, a very small town, just close to Nijmegen, over here. And I moved to Nijmegen to do my bachelor degree in physiotherapy, to do my PhD, and I moved to Liverpool to do my postdoc. But my story really started in Zandvoort, and as mentioned by Dave earlier, probably on the football pitch. Another picture from quite a long time ago. I think I was around 8 in this picture, and I had a plan. I was an Ajax supporter, and my plan was to become a player for Ajax. But quite early, soon enough, I realised I lacked something. I lacked completely talent. So on to plan B. I liked exercise, playing football, but also liked the area of medicine. So my plan B was to become the physiotherapist for IMAX. So, you know, sort of easier to get to that part. So I went to Nijmegen, did my degree in physiotherapy. You see me in South Africa, Cape Town, where I did one of my internships. And I really liked the area, and it was really fun. But more and more I started asking myself the question, why are we doing this type of treatment? What is the mechanism behind this disease? What is going on here? And that question of why became stronger and stronger, and I decided to go for a master's degree in biomedical science, also in Nijmegen. That's what you're seeing here a few years later, getting the degree. And so my plan to become IMAX physiotherapist was off. I left that. So I had another plan. And I really liked the area of science and asking and answering the questions on why and the mechanisms. So my plan was to do a PhD, become a researcher, and then become a professor. So sort of like what's indicated here. But reality is different. I soon enough found out. And I think what I've learned over the years that you need to come across certain people over time at the right time that can help you. And the first person that came along and that really helped me was Maria, here in the audience. And the first time we really met was the end of 2002. I had this plan, so I wanted to do a PhD. And I heard about a position at the Department of Physiology in Nijmegen. But I also heard that it was already given to someone else. I still thought, well, okay, you know, just go and approach her and we'll see what happens. To cut a long story short, 2 months later I started on that job and the other person went on to do something else. And I think for me at that stage it was really a perfect match, and a lot of things I learned in those first years from Maria. She gave me the opportunity not to do the studies that were planned, but also to add my own things to it, add novel techniques, collaborate with others. Another very strong message, what I learned from Maria, is that collaboration can be really powerful and really the way to new knowledge. The other thing what I really learned and still try to apply is that the strength of a study is not always in the technique that you use, but really the novelty. Be creative in what you design and what you do in the lab. So I think all in all, the impact that Maria had on me and my academic career, you could say that Maria is truly my academic mom. And with every academic mum, there is an academic dad. To my knowledge, no relation. This is, well, most of you already recognise him, Professor Danny Green. And I've met him in 2006 in Denver. Not a big surprise to most of you, but I met him in a bar. We chatted a bit, and we wrote a grant to come over to Liverpool. Eventually that got awarded, and well, sort of the rest is history, but that allowed me to make a step towards Liverpool. Here, this picture, which has a nice story, because this is during my PhD graduation. He was invited, and he came from Liverpool to Nijmegen to attend that ceremony. And he brought a present over. And if we zoom in, some of you recognise this. Little Creatures Pale Ale. It's Daddy is from Perth, Australia, and there is a small brewery in Perth called Little Creatures. And after he arrived here in Liverpool, the Ship of Mitre, a well-known pub where most of you probably have been. In the first years that Danny was here, I think Little Creatures Pale Ale was one of the best-selling beers that he introduced there. But he also brought us over to Nijmegen, and that was the moment when I had my first Little Creatures Pale Ale. Funny enough, a few years later, we as a family went to Australia, Perth, and Little Creatures, the brewery, does fantastic lunches, and it became my favourite place to have lunch. After I met Danny and when I went to Liverpool, he also had a huge impact on my career. A lot of things I learned from him. Again, the power of collaboration, but also finding your niche in research, how impactful that is. And if you find your area, your niche, also the technology, be extremely good in the area you are, because then you can become the world-leading scientist that you want to become. And those are really powerful messages I've learned from Danny and tried to apply it. So the next part of my talk, I would like to zoom in a bit more on what I've done and what the work that we as a cardiovascular group do and how what kind of impact that has. And for that, I would like to try to link that to a clinical situation, a real-life situation. For example, when the person comes to the doctor and the doctor considers exercise training and all the questions that come up around that type of situations. And a person once said to me, if you try to explain your work, try to explain it like it's for your family. So probably one person here in the audience already recognised himself. So I'm going to do that. That's my dad. This is my dad, and what I'm actually trying to do is to find a picture of him in a medical setting. But I couldn't find one, which actually is a good thing. Until a few months ago, my brother-in-law, Jorma, sent me a picture. That's this one. This is in a medical setting. And actually, the story behind it does relate to my research. I'm not going to tell it yet. So the first question a doctor could ask himself is, okay, will it be exercise training or will it be drugs that I'm going to prescribe? And a few years ago, a very powerful analysis study was published in the British Medical Journal that sort of answered this question. They analysed a large number of studies where they compared drugs versus exercise training. And they did that in various diseases like stroke, cardiovascular disease. And the outcome of that was that exercise training is at least equally effective as drugs in preventing disease development or progression. But in addition to the question, drugs versus exercise training, it may even be that exercise training is better than surgery. And to highlight that, to emphasize that, there was a study already 15 years ago from Germany where they compared or included patients with problems with their coronary artery. So there are the arteries around the heart where there was a stenosis, so the partial blockage of those arteries. And a normal treatment is to place a stent to open those arteries. So one group received that type of treatment. The other group was trained for a year. And it turned out that after a year, the people who were trained, received exercise training, had a better survival than those who received the stent placement. So I think in that case, the doctor shouldn't have too much doubt to prescribe exercise training. But also quite an important question for the doctor is what can I expect from exercise training? And the initial thoughts probably are along the lines of, okay, will impact the traditional risk factors. So here are a number of risk factors that in one way or another could be affected by exercise training and could explain the benefits. But there is a gap here, and I specifically use the word gap because Danny Green, he introduced the terminology, the risk factor gap, and this is to highlight that. If you try to explain the benefits of exercise training on cardiovascular risk, it cannot be just simply done by those risk factors. So what is in that gap? Well, one of it could be just simply physical activity or inactivity. And I would like to highlight some work from Asmee Bagger. She's one of the dual PhD students that we had. So a PhD student who does work here in Liverpool and in Nijmegen. And recently she published some very nice work in patients with heart failure. And it turns out that if you train people with heart failure, not everybody improves their level of fitness. And it's actually quite important because it turned out that those who actually do improve the level of fitness have a significantly better survival than those who cannot improve the level of fitness. So partly, I think that gap can be filled by that. I would also like to zoom in a bit on obesity and the impact of exercise training on obesity or weight. And for that, we have these two Homer Simpsons. Clearly, they differ in body composition and how they look. But if you look at weight, they have the same weight. And you can expect that the risk of developing disease is quite different. And if you look at the impact of exercise training, 4 months of exercise training will lead to a small drop in weight, but it's not more than, on average, 1 kilo. But other things happen. You do change your body composition, and especially the fat mass will reduce, and especially the fat around the organs, around the waist. So if you do prescribe exercise training as a doctor, don't expect too much on weight, but you can expect that you lose your waist. Then on the risk factor gap, can arteries explain the effects of exercise training? Well, the clear answer from my perspective is yes. And here you see an artery. And this is not just simply a artery, but it sort of represents what happens over time. Here you see the artery of a healthy young person, which looks normal, but over time, you see it progresses towards the big plaque and even a plaque rupture. There are various techniques to identify this, but it's more important to identify this. And what happens here is not necessarily a thickening, but there is vascular dysfunction. So the ability to detect dysfunction of arteries is quite important to identify those who will eventually develop these plaques, these plaque ruptures. So it's actually one of the reasons why I came to here, because the FMD technique. And for that technique, we scan the artery, you see the artery, and after a few minutes, we inflate a blood pressure cuff around the arm to occlude the blood flow to the artery. That slows down the blood, and after you release it after 5 minutes, it rapidly increases. And because that rubs against the wall, it starts to dilate. And it's in this way, the magnitude of the dilation is a measure of the health of arteries. At least that's the idea behind it. And it was actually one of the reasons why I came to Liverpool to work with Danny Green, because in the years before I came to Liverpool, he did a lot of work on improving technology. He developed software to analyze the diameter change, and that was independent of the observer. Before this, we had to do it manually. That's quite in one way scary because you sort of can manipulate what you can do. And this is all independent of a research of that. So that was really one of the reasons why he came to Liverpool. And in the first years, I've done quite a lot of work on improving the methodology, especially together with Alan Dawson, Mike Black. We spent a large number of hours in the lab working on this technique, improving this technique, understanding what factors affect this technique. That resulted in the development of guidelines that we published in 2011. I think that's just one of the things I've mentioned earlier, that you have to find your niche and become really technically at the best possible level to have an impact. And to demonstrate that impact, those guidelines that were published 6 years ago have now received more than 400 cites in the literature. And we still work on this technique. We still try to improve it. Work from Uncle Emil, another dual PhD student also here, has looked at how can we improve those guidelines and how important it is to stick to these guidelines. And Sophie Walder, she's now doing work on reference values. So what is normal, what's abnormal, to better understand this technique and to better understand who will be at risk for developing disease. Sort of driven by this knowledge and understanding the impact of being really good in one technique, we also explored another technique. And this technique is actually quite simple. It uses a bucket with ice. And there is a bit of a history behind it. Because in the 1960s, a person turned up at a cardiologist, and he was suspecting disease of angina, so the pressure on the chest, the pain on the chest. They had a test to provoke those symptoms, because under resting conditions, that was normally not the case. They didn't have any complaints. So they provoked these complaints by putting a hand in icy cold water. And that would provoke those complaints, and the patient would get complaints, well, take out the hand and the complaints are gone. But the idea behind it was that this test would cause a constriction of the arteries around the heart. And in the 1980s, actually, this test was used to understand how the arteries around the heart worked. But in the end, nobody really picked it up. And a couple of years ago, I found a paper that used the same test. I found that the artery in the neck, the carotid artery, the very easy to scan artery, behaves in the same way. So that's when we had the idea, well, perhaps this could be a simple test to examine the function of arteries. So if you scan the artery here, it sort of looks the same. But if you don't put a hand in icy water, what happens is that it starts to dilate. But this is only in healthy subjects. Because if you do the same test in people with disease or with risk factors, you don't see this dilation. What actually happens is you see a constriction in line with what happens in the coronary arteries. And again, some work from Uncle Emil has been really important in here, because she did demonstrate that these constrictions are more prevalent in those with risk factors in older people, and also is in line with what you see in the heart. And earlier this month, she even published a paper where she demonstrated that people with peripheral artery disease have a really poor risk, really poor prognosis. If they show a constriction, they have a fourfold increased risk of developing a cardiovascular event compared with those who show a dilation. So potentially a very simple and novel technique to identify those who have an increased risk for cardiovascular disease. That's a very important question for my lab, and it is whether exercise training can affect blood vessels. And you probably have heard of the athlete's heart. So it's bigger, you can pump around more blood. But we introduced the athlete's artery. And I can remember talking about this for the first time with Danny in the ship, where we had a lot of good discussions, a lot of great ideas, and I think the athlete's artery falls under that. But we did not always have good ideas in the ship. This is probably one of them. And in this case, Alan, Danny and I were sitting in the ship, and Danny came from Australia with a big beard, and he told us that he would shave off his beard. And we convinced him to do that in 2 stages, with stage 1, just keep the handlebar mustache. Which he did, which was great, and it's up to you really to decide whether it was a good idea. But a lot of work that we've done, I've done in collaboration with Danny, is around understanding how exercise training affects the blood vessels. And quite recently, we published a very nice paper in Physiological Reviews, one of the leading journals in our field, where we summarize all this work. And this is the key picture in that review, and I think that can be summarized quite quickly by the message that if you have an artery and you expose that artery to an increase in blood flow, and it doesn't really matter what reason, you could just take a hot tub, go to the sauna, do exercise. If you increase blood flow, you will see that it will start to dilate, it gets bigger, and you work towards that athlete's artery. That's the key message of this figure. And I think a key element in understanding all of this was a novel twist in the methodology that we adopted. And that's presented here. And that's work from Tony Tinkin. And we've adopted this approach now quite a few times. And it's actually quite simple, because if you train an artery, here is hand grip training, what you will see eventually, you work from this artery to that artery to the athlete's artery that accommodates a larger amount of blood flow. But interestingly, what we found is that if you perform hand grip exercise, but you inflate a blood pressure cuff around the arm, and you still do the same amount of work as the other arm, you don't see this increase in blood flow, and you don't see the adaptations. And that model, which was a very simple, non-invasive model, but a very strong design, has really helped us to understand what exercise training does, or other types of interventions, and how important blood flow is in remodeling of arteries. Sort of along the same line is the idea, okay, if blood flow just goes up, it may be beneficial for arteries. I showed you the technique where we inflate the cuff around the forearm for 5 minutes and then release the cuff. You see this big increase in blood flow. So the idea that we had, so if you do that repeatedly, perhaps that's a stimulus as well to improve the arteries. And now on already several occasions in healthies, but also in patients with type 2 diabetes, risk. Earlier this afternoon, nicely presented by Joan Maxwell, demonstrates that this may be a way to improve your vascular health. Then, back to that picture, and probably a very important question, what type of exercise should I prescribe? Before I explain this, first highlight walking exercise. And not just because of the walking, some of you will recognize this. This is in Nijmegen, the Nijmegen 4-day marches. And in 2007, Maria initiated research around this event. And I was fortunate enough to be there to help with the first version of that research. And every year, more and more collaborations started around that event, including several with Liverpool. So a very nice example how collaboration could lead to better insight into the impact of walking. And I think it's important to also recognise the impact that Thijssen has had on this work. He joined us a year later, and he really took it to the next level to understand the impact of walking and the impact it has on health. The other part that we in the lab have been interested in, especially the last years, is work initiated by Nicky Hopkins around sedentary behaviour. More and more we hear that sitting is bad, and we try to answer the question why sitting is bad, especially for cardiovascular health. And largely driven by her research and also Sophie Carter and Yvonne Hartmann, we try to understand what's going on. And earlier this year we wrote this review where we wrote down the potential mechanisms, how too much sitting affects blood pressure, vascular function, leads to weight gain. But also coming up with a very simple solution. And that's, before I get to that, one important thing that we added to that is some work from Sophie, where she found that after a couple of hours of sitting, the perfusion of your brain goes down. So, and it's very easy to prevent that, because if you break up that sitting every hour, which is a bit of walking exercise, you don't even have to exercise, you see this impact on vascular function, on brain perfusion. So it's quite a simple solution how to break up the sitting. And I think this is where the story actually fits in. Because my dad, as long as I know him, he didn't perform any exercise as we know it. However, he's quite fit, and he does a lot of physical activity. And helping out with my sister and my brother-in-law on their farm, he does a lot of physical activity, which I think really helps him to remain active, remain strong. But it could go wrong, because he was doing a bit of wood chopping, and which is very heavy exercise, and you have to be careful. And that's something that he wasn't, because a chunk of the wood came off and hit his nose. That's why he had to go to hospital, apart from probably thinking about some security things. Keep doing this. It's good for your health. On to the last bit. I've already indicated the strength of collaboration, and I've already indicated in terms of the scientific family tree, my scientific mom and dad. But I think it's, in that sense, also important to acknowledge my uncles, I would say, Keith and Tim. Really important for me here in Liverpool to give support, give confidence. So absolutely important for me here in Liverpool. And in addition to that, my scientific brothers and sisters. Here the cardiovascular group, a really excellent group with top scientists, and I'm really fortunate to work with all these guys together and do fantastic collaborative projects with all of you. And then my scientific children, if you want, from Nijmegen and from Liverpool. Thanks to them, I could present all of this. They've done the hard work and the real work in the lab. But of course, there's also the real family tree. Very important. So, and it's, I'm really glad that you're all here. And special thanks to my mom and dad. Dankjewel for your support. Before I go on to the near to final slide, I have to give a bit of information. Because when I prepared this talk, I realised that my others two are here in the audience as well for 45 minutes, and they don't understand the word of English. They probably don't even realise at this moment that I'm talking about them. So I gave them a task. I gave them a sheet of paper with pictures that came back in my presentation. And if all correct, they're just missing one. And that's the next slide. And I promised them if they would finish it, they would get a patent. So let's see whether they actually made it. Hey, super jongens. And obviously, I also have to thank Suzanne. I'm extremely proud of you. Extremely proud of what you've achieved, how you manage your own life, your career, family, friends who are here as well, how you manage the kids, how you manage me. But foremost, I'm extremely proud that we still enjoy each other so much. So thanks a lot. As a final bit of my talk, I would like to show you a short movie. I think a few of you have already seen it. The beginning of this movie is in Dutch. Please ignore that. The second bit is in English, but it has subtitles because it's in proper Scots.
Het Britse programma Tattoo Fixers bevat een bijzonder verhaal over een soldaat die even zijn benen verloor. Behalve een been heeft de chirurg toch iets geamputeerd.
My name's Andy Grant, I'm 26, I'm from Liverpool. Growing up in Liverpool, football is like a religion. When I turned 16, the first tattoo I was going to get was obviously going to be a Liverpool tattoo. I got a You Never Walk Alone tattooed on my leg. When I was 17, I went off and joined the Royal Marines. There was war in Afghanistan that I was caught in an IED explosion. My leg was really badly damaged. So then I decided to have the leg amputated. I was put under anaesthetic and woke up 2 hours later as an amputee. The surgeon came round to see me. He said, I've got good news and I've got bad news. The good news is the operation went really, really well. So I said, okay, what would be the bad news then? He said, I'm afraid your tattoo looks a little bit different. He'd unfortunately cut off the word alone. So the tattoo not really true. Thank you.
Thank you for a very entertaining talk this afternoon, this evening. There's some recently published figures, correct me if I'm wrong, Kit, that LJMU has a higher proportion of international collaborative publications than any other university in the country, other than a couple of specialised research institutes. And when we've got people like Dick, it's easy to see how such a thing comes about. So it's the spirit of collaboration, both here and internationally. And we'd like to take that further. It's an excellent contribution to that agenda. Now, one of the things about a British professorial lecture, I don't know the same in Holland, I know it's different in Scandinavia, is you don't get to ask any questions. So, no questions for Dick now, but we're going to go outside in a minute for some food and drink, and I'm sure if there's anybody got any pressing questions they'd like to follow with Dick, he'd be more than glad to entertain them there. So, would you join me again in thanking Dick? What was an absolutely superb talk?